Artisan earrings. Again, what are artisan earrings? Earrings that are unique or custom, one of a kind most often, and handmade. This doesn't mean that you can't make a number of these earrings, but if you compared each pair to each pair, they would be slightly different. Like you couldn't make two exactly the same if you wanted to. So this is the first video, and in this section I am covering design and construction. I could see what I wanted to make in my head, but I had not a clue how to make them. But I began anyway. I drew the shape that I had imagined, and I actually set a pebble where it would go into place to see how wide I would have to make the earrings to accommodate the pebble. You could do the same. Take the item that you want to incorporate or hang in the middle and use it as a guide in making your template. Remembering, of course, that your metal clay piece will shrink about 15% depending on the type of metal and clay that you use. You can always refer to the manufacturer's shrinkage rate. I cut out my drawing in stencil paper, which I use a lot. I made two templates here. One is taller and narrower and the other shorter and fatter. Because I'd never made these earrings before, I did not know how they would turn out, thus the two designs. I can count on liking one better than the other, which I do. I like the tall, narrow one. Then I was faced with how do I make the silver frame that has a design on it and holes in it. First, I thought if I could cut them out thick enough, I could drill a hole on each side. Notice how I roll my template onto my clay, and this leaves or left a slight indent and a guide for cutting. But it became clear pretty quickly that cutting out thick pieces was a mess and not going to work. Too thick. It changed shapes too easily. Just awkward. Then I thought maybe I could roll a snake of clay and press that slightly flat between two oiled texture mats. This would have given my earrings some texture. I could not figure out how to make two similar and complementary earrings this way. I could have used my guide, but I just couldn't figure out how to do that. Finally, I decided to roll blue cards, slat thick clay, no texture. Blue slats are 4 cards thick. So I planned on rolling 2 of these per earring and then putting them together for a total of 8 cards. I kind of would wish they weren't that thick. 8 cards is a lot of clay, but I did need room for the hole, and that would accommodate the wire. And extra clay meant that I could sand finish them nicely. Why am I showing all these trials? I guess to show you that you can create while you work with clay. My theories on how to make these went right out the window once I tried some of them. So I can plan all I want for making a piece, but until I actually put my hands in the clay, on the clay, I will find out how the piece actually needs to be made. So back to the earrings. My earrings needed a hole, which I had to figure out. What would I use to hold that hole's place in the wet clay? It had to be small, less than 1 millimeter for sure, and I wanted something that would burn up in the kiln, yet be strong enough to hold the place. So I put some Elmer's glue on a small piece of glass and ran my string through it to saturate the piece of string. Then I clamped a large clamp on one end and hung the other end from a stand so that it was hanging perfectly straight, and so that when it dried, it would dry straight. And I let that dry before I began working on the earrings. As I showed you already, this is how I rolled the clay. I rolled the clay, no texture, to a thickness of blue slats or 4 cards. So the front side then was made and still wet. I had painted olive oil on the back of my hand, and I tapped the leather stamp into this area to oil the stamp. I made sure I was stamping complementary corners, which meant here that I would first stamp in the more square corner of each earring. When these earrings are worn, then the stamp design will be toward the outside and the front of both earrings. I stamped with a first stamp and then a second different stamp. I was totally freehanding it here, making up the design as I went along. It's almost impossible to restamp well using leather stamps, just for your information. These earrings would be built by putting two pieces together. In other words, I needed to make 4 of these shapes, 2 per earring. Despite that I worked with a small amount of clay here, I managed to cut out the second piece per earring. Again, complementary, these would be the backs. While I'm showing this, I will explain that I could have made the 2 pieces per earring by cutting out their shapes, drying them, and then putting them together with slip or paste and water. To assemble pieces while they are still wet clay is challenging in a different way and results in a slightly different look than if they were assembled in the dry clay phase. I chose to put the 2 pieces of one earring together while the clay is wet. One of the criteria for wet-to-wet assembly is to keep your clay moist, all parts of it. So I took a mister and misted my pieces. Then I returned the fronts and flipped them over, removing them from the Teflon, so now the design is down. I took a paintbrush and wet them with water, tons of water, and then I placed my dried strings in place, matching them earring to earring. Then I took the backs that I just made and figured out which one needed to go on top of the front part. And I flipped the back over onto the front and adjusted the fit. I planned on working the fit a bit more, but first I put the second one on. Notice how the wire gives the clay a bulge. This would not have happened were these pieces dry. The trick then became how to add water between the pieces, the front and the back, without adding water between the Teflon and the earring. It turns out I needed to do it very carefully. The water would have a negative impact on the stamp design if I had gotten it between the Teflon and the earring. So I added water to the tops then and took a finger and smoothed while I pressed a little bit. Always remember to put your unused clay away. If it has a tendency to dry out, you can mist it and roll it up really hard without capturing air, and then roll it into a ball really hard with no seams in it anywhere. I happen to know that my plastic wrap had some holes in it, so I double wrapped it here. If I'd wanted to get real anal about this, which I did, I could add some paper towel and moisten that with water, which I did. So I popped the cap into place, and then this clay was good in here for another month or so. Here is the second pair with a slightly different shape. I made the main earring part using a shorter and fatter template, and I'm sure to flip over the template for the second earring, again to make them complementary. Because I nicked the one earring, I smoothed it out with water on a finger, and I noticed that I still have a little nick that I would have to fill in with clay and sand. So I checked to be sure that I didn't change their shape much. And I let these dry, and now you can go on to the next video, the second video.